Welcome to Hidden Stuff, where I dive deep into the human experience with humor and heart. Join me as I explore self-awareness, growth, and the stories of people who have overcome some of life's challenges. I'm here to share positivity, gratitude, but most importantly, me. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of it. Cheers. On today's episode, we have got Afnan. He's a model, a musician on the path to becoming a shaman. I'm not even joking. Bloody intelligent, and he's got a lot of knowledge to share. This episode was enlightening as much as it was enjoyable. And the man of a million one-liners. Enjoy. Here we are.
Here we are.
Afnan, thank you for finally joining me here in my makeshift podcast studio.
I love what you've done with the place, and you know me, dude. I will always make space for you.
You've been very patient with me.
Hey, name of the game.
We've made a lot of headway with our conversations in the few times that we've met. I don't think we've ever had a very surface level conversation.
I don't think we have either.
It's always gone quite deep, quite quick.
But it's that thing we were talking about in the coffee shop, right? Plato's 3 levels of friendship.
Tell me again.
So Plato refers to these 3 levels of friendship as the first being utility, right?
Yes.
So it's a mutually beneficial experience for both parties. And when that disappears, the friendship disappears. And then there is pleasure, right? So when 2 parties engage in a friendship or relationship out of pleasure, and when the pleasure disappears, so does the friendship. Now, the 3rd level is that of virtue. And that's where you stick around for the long haul, for one another's growth, your seasons, your journeys, everything. You know, I feel like that's what this is, and I feel like that's what this has been from, well, the beginning, dude.
Through the highs and the lows. I think it's like I mentioned earlier, you need to be at a certain level of your own personal growth before you are able to unlock that virtue kind of friendship.
I agree.
Do you know what I mean? Because in the past, I've had friends where if anything upset me within the friendship, I would take that as a personal attack to self. And then I would either detach or I would retaliate, and thereby kind of ruining the friendship in one way or another.
Well, it all gets a lot easier when, like, you kind of stop taking yourself so seriously and so definitely. And when you recognize that, you know, within your day-to-day, the only constant truly is going to be change, then all of these things, these challenging things that come up, they're just echoes of that change, or catalysts for that change. And then you can be like, well, that person's a good mirror to me.
Right.
Cool. Thanks for that lesson. But sometimes it takes time to process as well.
And I think it takes time to get to a point in your own growth to be able to appreciate those things. In your journey, at what point do you feel like, and when I say journey, I mean like your human experience.
Yeah.
When did you start kind of delving into, you know, the self-awareness?
I think for me, it started fairly young. So even as far back as being, I want to say like 2, 3
years old.
Yeah. I had an awareness of like how what I did sat in the grand scheme of things and the consequences of each action, which every child has.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You know, you see Bella when she's up there and she's, you know, just being.
Being, yeah.
She's very much present in that. But then you forget and it resurfaces and it takes those catalysts to allow that to resurface, right? So oftentimes that's trauma. And a lot of that journey is how you meet that trauma or perceived trauma, right? So for me, it was having to push emotional extremities within myself to then be able to be like, okay, I can exist in these spaces and be fine. And then when something brings up that feeling in you again, you know you've been there. You know you've been able to survive there. So, and there's this funny thing that me and my friends say always, it ain't that deep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Something that's so deep becomes not that deep.
Yeah. In those moments of traumatic events that you've been through, do you get lost in the trauma? Like when I was 15, for example, my father passed away.
Yeah.
So traumatic event. I can safely say, looking back, that I completely lost myself in the moment. I didn't come to terms with it for many years. Did you ever lose yourself to trauma?
Of course.
Right.
I think you have to lose yourself to trauma to be able to then realize, firstly, that you've lost yourself to trauma.
Yeah.
And then find your way out.
Because there's a lot of people that they discover spirituality or self-awareness or have an awakening or whatever terminology you want to use. And from the people that I've spoken to, they're often people that have been through very difficult challenges in their life.
Yeah.
And some of them, or many of them, have kind of hit a rock bottom before whether they've intentionally looked for answers or they've come across it by, the divine. And then they start understanding spirituality and self-reflection and looking inwards.
Yeah.
That was very much the case for me.
Yeah.
Did you ever have that moment where it was like, oh, this is the beginning of another stage of growth?
Yeah. So the end of one epoch and the beginning of another. Yeah.
What's an epoch?
So an epoch is, let's think of an epoch as like a determined period, a cycle. Let's call it a cycle. Right? So the end of one cycle, beginning of another, right? Yeah, absolutely. And I've been through many of these cycles in my time.
Yeah.
In different ways. And, I talk about the idea of a lesson, right? And a lesson, if it's not honored and if it's not learned and if it's not heard and integrated, then it'll circle back around and return with greater energy, right? So what starts as a whisper will come back as a slap.
Yeah.
So it's really important in these moments to trust yourself and to trust your instincts and not let the thought patterns that you currently have get in the way of that intuition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people are detached from their own intuition. So I guess I want to ask a bit more about your journey with spirituality.
Okay. Yeah, let's go.
Why do you feel so passionate about it?
It's not necessarily that like it's an outward, I'm so passionate about this, right? It's just a state of being. It's just who I am. Oftentimes when people are outwardly very much in that space of like, I am this, I am that, and like that is the core of their identity. A lion doesn't have to tell you it's a lion. A dragon doesn't have to tell you it's a dragon. They just are. Right? And for me, it's just a way of being. And it's something that's helped me come to terms with a lot of the things that I faced in my life. Again, circling back to the whole trauma experiences. But then, just finding something greater than myself. And this is why I believe a lot of people turn to religion and stuff as well, because religion, in my opinion, is an access to spirituality.
Yeah.
And I don't particularly, adhere, dogmatically to any religious belief or anything like that. But I read a lot. Read a lot of texts, read a lot of books. I continue to do so because I feel like it's inspiring for me and like it's important for my journey to continually learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's important for me because it just allows me to be the most me.
Yeah. The term God.
Yes.
If someone that you've just met and they're talking to you about spirituality and they say, do you believe in God?
Yeah.
What would your answer be?
Well, I would say I believe in something that is greater than myself. Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Because the word God holds so much connotation to other things, and it's also become it's almost become like a dirty word.
Well, here's a really easy
when it
thing
shouldn't,
for it.
Right?
Yeah, like a really easy hack for that is whatever your subset of beliefs or whatever, substitute that in for the word God when you're having that conversation and see how your conversation changes. Because if you're automatically shutting off to a conversation because the use of one word, which ultimately, when you break it down, is describing the same thing, then that's just two people looking at a bottle from different sides and arguing about the color. You
shared with me once about, and if you're comfortable talking about it, when you were in your teens, you had a moment. you were struggling with weight issues.
Oh, dude, yeah. Like, so I used to be like hugely overweight and stuff, and like, you know, walking up the stairs was a struggle. Like going anywhere, doing anything physical was, because I moved here from Pakistan when I was 9, and you know, we didn't have a lot of abundance in Pakistan, but when we came here, we had like such an overwhelm of abundance of everything. And so, you know, like I'd never seen Smarties before, and I remember that memory and being like, oh my God. And so it was time to chow down, brother. And chow down on everything, you know, 4 quarter pounds with cheese for lunch every day, you know, which is not healthy for a kid, let's be real. But that inevitably turned into, you know, severe weight issues and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I kind of made a decision, maybe around when I was 15, to be like, no more. I don't, this is not how I see myself. This is not how I am. And, you know, I don't want my health to suffer. And I want to make it past like 40.
Yeah. Did you find comfort in food as well as, because obviously there's the novelty initially.
Yeah.
But then there's a step further than that.
For me, it wasn't comfort. For me, it was habitual.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So I wasn't eating to gain a level of comfort per se, because I went the other way too.
Yeah.
So once I like lost it, because I lost all of the weight over maybe 6 months, right? So very, very fast. I would just go outside and just run around like the compound that we lived in until it got dark, and I came back in, like, which, you know, I wouldn't recommend, because it's like, you know, it's pretty hot on the knees and stuff, but it worked, right? But then there started to be this influx of positive reinforcement to do with that, right?
From others.
From peers, from people at school. I was never seen as like, you know, the attractive person or like the popular person per se. And I wasn't particularly bothered about that at the time. But when I got a taste of it, then it's that dopamine hit, right? And then it's like, oh, okay, so if I'm cutting down on my food, if I'm exercising loads, then I get a reward, right? And then so I started getting down that loop. And, you know, by the time I got to university when I was like 18, I was like very, very thin.
Yeah.
Like I would eat like a salad a day,
Yeah.
sometimes an apple a day. You know what I mean?
So you went complete other way.
Completely the other way.
And that was driven by the affirmation from others.
Affirmation from others and complete body dysmorphia, because in my mind I still saw myself as that kid, which, being totally honest with you, has only went away recently, like as recently as this year. So this is how long it's taken me to come to terms with it. And
how old are you now?
35.
35.
And you know, like part of the reason we met was because like, it was on a modeling job, right? So I've been a model for 15 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's
with
severe body dysmorphia issues. Yeah. And it sounds hilarious, but like when you step into that world, I had to put just my blinkers up to this is my job and this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, right.
But the after effects of that were often lingering, right? Because you then constantly think about this thing, or I certainly did anyway, of like, oh God, I need to like, this bit's not right, this bit's not right, this bit's, when in effect, you know, you have to be so grateful and thankful for your body, you know, and
no, absolutely. So where was the change? Because if you've got this like internal dialogue which is not serving you, right?
Yeah.
But it's on an automatic mode, right? You're not consciously bullying yourself.
No.
And at the same time, you've got a level of self-awareness. There's a level of, there's a lot of reflection. But then what was the turning point in that this year? Like at what point in your spiritual growth or in just your self-growth did you get to where you were like, oh, I can let that go?
It was when I felt truly held.
Yes.
When I felt truly held by the people closest to me.
Yeah.
That did the trick.
Yeah.
And I was able to, you know, work out in Ibiza.
Yeah.
And have my shirt off and be totally happy.
Yes.
And it was amazing. It was so liberating.
It's fascinating how, you know, a lot of people, especially now, because there seems, like we mentioned earlier, there seems to be like this worldwide kind of resurgence of awakening, right? More and more people are starting to realize that there's something bigger, and that it starts within. But it's funny that even on my journey through becoming self-aware and believing in God and spirituality, there's different layers to it. And like when I met Briggy, I was on that journey. But by meeting her, it's kind of fast-tracked it a little bit because she was at similar levels of the journey. And we're both very different, and we brought different things to the table, but we found like a mutual, I don't know, more than love, obviously, but also like respect and compassion and understanding. And like that goes a long way to have that from when it's authentic from another person.
Man, authenticity is the name of the game.
Yeah, right. And I think this is where I've struggled a lot in past relationships, is that sometimes it appears that it's all those things, but then under the surface it's actually very different. And those cracks, you know, they appear, and relationships ended up being actually quite toxic, not just from my side, but from the other side.
I think there's an interesting thing to be, you know, aware of in those situations, you know, because certainly I've been in that position, and there's this idea of archetypes, right? So I was saying to you earlier that, you know, I embody the archetype of the warrior for a long time. You know, it began in me very young, and it's only recently, again, that I've been able to let it go and like soften into the yielding, into the deep feminine, and, you know, that balance of alignment, right? So I've been able to receive. But when you are living an archetype that has outserved its purpose, you're in the shadow of the archetype, right? And then the longer you're in the shadow of the archetype, the longer you start to be in it for good, the more you will embody the shadow qualities of that archetype. So with the warrior archetype, that would be, you know, piety, being a sacrificial lamb, and like, you know, always putting yourself last and putting others' needs first, like having this savior complex thing, you know, especially in relationships, you know, where it's like, but it's a really good thing to take responsibility in that and be like, no, I'm bringing this half at least to the table, where like I'm providing this set of guidelines for my partner to be like, I will do everything for you. And that's what I want to do. Because then what the precedent you set is then your partner will be like, okay, well, you know, they're happy in doing everything for me. So then that will create this dynamic which will serve neither.
It also it opens up the possibility to be taken advantage of.
Completely.
And not at the fault of the other person, but if they are that way inclined to do so, they will. And almost you could argue that you're enabling them.
Of course
to fulfill that. Just to put it in context, how was that archetype created? And okay, so let's define archetype first, because it's a relatively new word to me as well.
So you can think of an archetype as a set of characteristics embodied in an image, which is not a complete representation of the self, but aspects of the self brought together to serve a purpose. So that's how I would define an archetype, right? So the trick is to know how to shapeshift, right? When to choose what archetype to serve the situation best, you know, to serve your health best, you know, to provide as much value as you can without sacrificing what you need also. I think that's
it's so
trick.
Important.
Yeah.
It's so important. And because a lot of us, I think it's predominantly a bloke thing where we feel like we need to be the provider, the strong one, suppress all emotions, although they wouldn't call it suppressing emotions. It's like just be a man. And, you know, do everything for your partner. And so from the outside, it seems like that's the heroic right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Whereas in reality, you know, it's detrimental to the self.
Well, completely. I mean, which is why I'm so glad, you know, there's more of a conversation around, you know, male or male presenting beings talking and having spaces like this, for instance, you know, like some of the guests you've had on, they've been very open about their experiences, and it encourages more people to be in that space, because it's an act of yielding into the feminine, right? So it's and by feminine I mean the divine feminine, right? So where you're softening, because everything is a balance between push and yield, right? If you're pushing all the time and you're never yielding, then you're going to become very sad very quick.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a paradox there, because it looks like you become hard on the surface, but the truth is you're crying very loudly on the inside.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's a tragedy, really. Where do you think this has come from? This like male need to be a man, lacking any sort of divine feminine. What was the terminology used?
So all push, no yield.
All push, no yield.
Yeah.
We need more yield.
So you can think of it in like the terminology. It exists across many spectrums, but you know, in Tantra, there's like Shiva and Shakti, right? So, you know, the Shakti is like the doing energy. The Shiva is the energy of being, right? And it's the same thing, you know, when we talk about divine feminine, divine masculine, you know, like the divine masculine is like the doing aspects of life, and then like the divine feminine are like, you know, the yielding, the creativity, all of that, the softening, you know, the listening, all of that. And each must have their place. Otherwise, it all moves out of balance.
Do you believe that a relationship can't survive if you have that dynamic?
I think relationships, especially when they first begin, right? I think one of the most important things is, where do you start? So if you start on an unlevel playing field, if there is any sort of anything other than a completely, you know, level ground where, you know, both people are equals and they move into it with that, and it's not began over, you know, a trauma bond or anything like that. If it's like genuinely
good old trauma bond.
Good old trauma bond. I mean, we've all been there.
Love a trauma bond.
We do. We love a trauma bond. Human beings, for some reason, love a trauma bond, you know? But
trauma buddies.
Literally, that's exactly what it is, you know, like comfy friends, trauma buddies, you know?
Yeah.
But I think if you don't begin from that space, you will inevitably breed toxicity, because, you know, one person will be higher up than the other, and then it'll be like a balancing act or an attempted balancing act. And because one person has spent time on top, as it were, then the other person will have to have that time on top as well. And like within this transition will be a lot of oftentimes resentment.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly.
Because, you know, one person's being pulled down and one person is engaging in, you know, being the green-eyed monster, whether they admit it or not.
And they're not both being true to themselves or to the other person, right? They're suppressing certain emotions, and they're acting more of something that they're not.
Yeah.
And probably they don't feel very seen. Imagine you're in a relationship and you feel like you have to act a certain way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you don't feel like you're being seen.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you haven't given yourself the opportunity to be seen.
Well, there's an interesting thing with being seen, though.
Okay.
Because
tell me,
when you're inviting the light in, you're asking to be seen, right?
Yeah.
Are you ready to be seen? That's a really, really important distinction.
Right.
Because if you're not ready to be seen, you will actively avoid the situations that bring your shadow to the light. Whereas if you are in a situation where you can provide a safe space, the shadow naturally moves into the light.
Yeah, right. Oh, I like that a lot. I feel like it resonates with me, because I feel like that's kind of what I want from just doing these podcasts with certain people.
Yeah.
It's like I want to invite that and like create a safe space for people to share what they feel like they need to share in order to look at it themselves as well. Because sometimes people share things they didn't even realize they needed to share.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't need to dig that deep for people to like unload, right?
Sometimes you ask them, how are you doing? And then there it is.
There's
your podcast.
Well, we've been there, right? We've been there. So I spoke to a few friends yesterday, and I asked them what questions I should ask you.
Cool.
And on the surface, they seem like people that aren't necessarily in the spiritual space. One question that came up.
Yeah.
Two questions for you.
Ooh, okay. Throw it down.
One question that came up was, why? Why are you working in the spiritual space? Is that a fair statement, actually? Are you working in the spiritual space, or working towards to work in the spiritual space?
Depends what you mean by working in the spiritual space.
You're, with intention, working towards to be in a position where you can do shamanistic
Yeah, so I'm
Rituals?
getting, so not so much shamanic ritual, but like, so I'm on my shamanic path. I'm learning from some incredible teachers like Lim, Debbie, Chris. We're getting taught the ways of the Peruvian Quechua lineage, right? One of the most revered, one of the most kind of longest standing lineages in shamanism. And it's so much more than just oh, you can do this or you can do that, because anything that might seem attractive from that side, like the whole reading energies, like the entities thing, which like so many people obsess over. It's kind of not the point. The first thing about shamanism is integrity, living an integral life. And like, being a shaman is also known as being an earth keeper, right? A medicine man or a medicine woman, right? It's people who work with sacred plants and sacred plant medicine and ways of being and like different aspects of the body. Like, and by that, I mean, your physical body, astral body, like, and beyond, the many layers and sheaths that we embody.
Yeah.
In order to create a more harmonious world for us and the people around us.
What brings you to wanting to do all of this?
Honestly, it was always in my, it was always my path. I just didn't know that it was this, and the way that I've lived my life in my adult years, the way that I am and the human that I am is so in line with these values that it's such a natural fit. It's like they always say, the path finds you. Especially if it's right. And if you're meant to do this, then the path finds you.
Yeah.
And I very much feel like that. I feel like the path found me. I feel like circumstances aligned in a beautiful way. And I think when you recognize, these beautiful coincidences, you recognize the universe conspiring. And that's very much what happened.
I mentioned to these beautiful people yesterday that you were on just like all of us, on a journey, and you're on a path to, and I put it very bluntly with not really understanding it, but saying like you're on a path to becoming a shaman.
Yes.
And I think when people hear that, a lot of people have their own ideas of what that means.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think
Hollywood's a lot to blame for this.
Right. And I mentioned that someone asked how old you were, and I said that you're in your mid-30s.
Yeah.
And they were like, but how can he be a shaman? What life experience has he got? And
Which life?
Right. Well, so my response was, because I was very aware not to become defensive on your behalf.
No, I appreciate you, and I love you for that.
Because it was my initial rude, but it wasn't. It was more like unaware. But my response was that you can have people that are, in their 60s, 70s that still haven't had one life experience, and people in their 20s that have had the equivalent of 3. Yeah. And, a step deeper, many more, right?
Yeah. I think, in order to address that, then, I think the skepticism from which your friend approached this question is actually healthy. I think it's a good thing to do. Because, as we were discussing, there are a lot of people in the spiritual space that will embody certain paths, right? Or on the surface, at least, embody certain paths and lead people down certain roads where they haven't quite trodden, right? Which can be quite dangerous.
So you mean lead other people down a path which they themselves haven't?
Precisely, which they themselves haven't been down, right? Whereas, like, I'm working with some amazing teachers, and I mean like amazing. So, we're going to Peru next year as well to like work with the heads of our lineage as well, and like, work with those guys, which is going to be beautiful. But I think a lot of it comes down to the depth of your inquiry. Because the depth of your inquiry isn't necessarily determined by the years you've spent on a planet.
What does that mean if you have to open up that sentence?
Of your inquiry, by what I mean by that is how much life do you want to live? What are your parameters? What parameters have you set? What have you invited in? What are you willing to experience? Where are you willing to go? Have you stayed in the same place your entire life?
Yeah.
Have you lived in many other places? There are many, many factors.
You said, what are you willing to experience? And I think that that's a poignant one, because I think a lot of people, they make a preconception or a judgment based on, you know, their life experience up until now. And I think a lot of people, when they hear people talk about spirituality or, you know, or God, they make a blanket judgment.
Yeah.
And they possibly don't listen because it contradicts their own belief systems.
Yeah.
To anyone who might have the door slightly open,
Yes.
because they're curious, I'd like to think anybody watching this either the door's open or they're having a little sneak peek.
Yes.
How would you define to someone that's just opening the door for the first time, what is spiritualism and what can it do for a person?
So think of it this way, right?
And I know it's such a broad question.
It's a good question, though.
But thanks.
It's a very, very good question. So think of it this way, right? So when children enter the world, they have an overwhelming sense of wonder, right? And we lose that over time. What spirituality, I think, can do, and like what broadening your spectrum of experience can do, is it can reignite that sense of wonder. So when you learn to find wonder in the mundane, everything becomes magic.
Learning to appreciate everything.
Yeah, but like deeply appreciate at a cellular level and beyond. So like, for example, right? If you are walking down the same path you've always walked, right? You're walking to work or whatever, right? If you just take a moment to be present, to be right there in the moment, and just look at the world around you, you will notice so much more of life happening, right? Leaves changing, the wind blowing, the sound, the melody within the wind, right? Warmth, cold, all of these sensations, the ground beneath your feet, gravity, all of these sensations that are by and large ignored in favor of living in either the past or the future, right? And you can't, I say this thing, right? The fruit of gratitude is born of the tree of presence, just as the tree of presence is born again from the fruit of gratitude, right? So in layman's terms, that means when you are present, you'll be happier. When you're happy, you'll be present. Anything outside of that, when your mind is too much in the past, you're likely to fall into depression. When your mind's too much in the future, you're likely to be very anxious. Joy exists in the present, truly being here now.
And it's funny because there'll be people that are hearing what you're saying about, you know, the leaves, the weather changing, the wind, the small things. And so many people they'll brush it off without having consciously practiced it.
Yeah.
And I'm in full agreement with you, obviously, but like until you consciously practice it, you can't understand how beneficial it is to let yourself stay in that place.
Just to let yourself be.
Yeah, to be, and also like as a reminder, if you are inclined to look back or to worry about the future, as practice to allow those thoughts to flow, but then to gently steer it back to present, right?
Well, I think of them as a reminder to get back into the present.
Yeah,
so if I'm ever feeling anxious or if I'm feeling sad, I'm like, oh, I'm not present.
Yeah, nice. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been a big part of my journey as well, especially the past year, I think, where, you know, gratitude and staying present and appreciating we call them the little things, but really they're the all things. But anyway, and then I will kind of gently slide back into automatic mode. And then, I start feeling anxious. Yeah. And I'm like, I do now look at anxiety as a little flag going, hey, hold on.
Yeah.
Where are you going, man?
This is it.
Like,
What are you doing, buddy?
bring yourself back. Bring yourself back. And then for me, I've got like certain different tools, if you like, that will help me get back there.
Yeah.
What are your like, what tools do you use to help you continue on this journey of staying present? And
Yeah. So one of the big things for me is journaling.
So I feel like I know what journaling is, but what is it for you?
For me, it is literally, you know, when I get up first thing in the morning, writing down, like answering a set of questions, right? Like, how did I sleep? How many hours of sleep did I get? How did I wake up feeling? And what is my intention for the day? Right? Because then already you're starting your day in a place of presence. Right? And then you can go about your day. And then my thing after that is, you know, I do something physical like training or like, you know, yoga, and like yoga is a huge part of my life. And then, you know, as you go about your day, you do your thing and, you know, you make as many conscious decisions as you can. Then I do the same thing at night, you know, where I'm like, okay, what are my 3 highlights of the day? You know, how did it go? How did today go? What happened? What are the key points? And, you know, that just gives space for if anything's, you know, happening that needs greater attention, or if anything indeed needs greater gratitude, then you're creating space to, you know, bookend your day with that.
Yeah.
And by doing so, these little things that turn into big things, they don't have that power anymore, right? Because you've already processed them.
Yeah.
Or have already begun the process of processing them.
Which leads me to my next question. So say you have, you know, the nature of life is that inevitably at some point something's going to happen which wasn't as perfect as one might have liked, whether it's the loss of a loved one, or you know the drill. When those things happen, how do you personally approach them? Because some might argue that if you're actively staying present and with gratitude, are you then neglecting feelings, the negative feelings that you might have had?
Well,
not negative feelings, but the feelings.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So, you know, I think everything has a gift and a shadow, right? Everything has a siddhi and a shadow, right?
A what in the shadow?
A siddhi, that's the Sanskrit for like gift, right?
Okay.
So if you're not present in your darkness as you are in your light, then you're not present. Being present in the darkness is feeling it, right? So if you're in pain, you feel the pain, right? You feel that pain and you get to know it. And I think the longer you sit in pain, right, the more you come to terms with it. You don't stay in it for any longer than you need to, because then you start to stew in it, right? That's a different thing. But you start to define these soft edges, right? These malleable edges within experiences to a certain degree, which can then help you navigate how long you need to spend in an experience to gain the most out of it for your journey. And then when it's time to cool off and return to a different state of being.
I think one of the most beautiful aspects of going through those dark times, or not even necessarily dark, but difficult times, sad times, is that when you do inevitably come out the other end, even though you may have some new scars, there's so much strength that comes with those scars.
Absolutely.
And one of the beautiful strengths that come with it is that shared experience that you can now have in the future with other people that are new to that experience.
Exactly.
And so that's, you know, you can then resonate with other people that are going through a similar thing. And that connection is so much of what being human is all about for me. It's those connections. And often those connections are built around traumatic events, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Or, like struggle.
There's a trap in that, though.
Tell me.
So the trap in that is if that becomes the driving force of your experience at any point, then you're out of it.
The driving force being, what do you mean?
So if like your motivation to better yourself is to help other people, then the shadow of that is more likely to show up, right? Because that's again when you find quote unquote gurus, right?
Yeah.
Who are looking to help people, but it's in an effort to heal themselves, right? So the journey of healing the self should just be the journey of healing the self, right? And the journey of the self should just be the journey of the self, right? If a byproduct of that is then that, yes, you're in a place where you can offer perspectives to people who come to you and ask for those perspectives, then that's great.
No, that is interesting, because I definitely I gravitate towards, and it's like an ongoing joke with me and Briggy, I gravitate towards people that have gone through trauma.
Yeah.
And yeah, on reflection, a lot of it is because it's like I'm still working through my own.
Yeah.
By talking about other people's.
Yeah.
And not using, that's the wrong word, but by connecting through trauma, it's like I'm just going through it. But then, yeah.
But it's not out of, and I know this with you, it's not out of any like malice or any like malintent at all.
No. And I don't feel it's out of even from an ego place.
No, you're genuinely trying to help, right?
Yeah. But maybe I do lean a lot onto it more than is needed sometimes. Because sometimes when I meet someone for the first time, I'm like, right, are they neurodivergent? Have they got any trauma from their childhood?
Yeah.
Where can I connect? And that
this is interesting, because that's how you've learned to connect.
Exactly.
Right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And that's what I did the majority of my life is, especially when I was very unaware, it was like, right, how can I get people to like me?
Yeah.
Because I need people to like me to feel safe, because I'm so painfully insecure in myself that I need the validation from others to feel whole. But now
that's some beautiful self-awareness, by the way.
Right. But and now that on top of that, with growth, I no longer feel those things, but I'm still having that same pattern.
Well, it's because
from the old self.
There's a very simple reason for that, because how long has that pattern existed?
Yeah, the majority of my life.
Exactly.
Right?
So how long is it going to take to undo?
So, okay, so how do you undo that? By consciously bringing it into intention?
I put it this way, right? A choice becomes a path when you repeat it. Every time you're faced with a decision like that, if you're conscious enough and present enough to be able to choose, then you can redefine your path. There's actually a really helpful thing with that as well. Breathing. Take a breath before you make a decision in that moment. Take 3 breaths.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Deep breaths.
Which helps with the impulsivity of the ADHD anyway, or just the impulsivity.
Exactly, because I feel like, people are very keen to fill silences, but the silence of presence is not the same as the silence of absence, right?
Absolutely. So, okay, so let's put it into like an example.
Yeah.
So I meet this fella, this geezer, who seems like a nice bloke, and we start chatting.
Yeah.
On some level, I want to connect with this human.
Yeah.
Because I enjoy that. But then I feel like he might have ADHD because my brain just picks up the ADHD traits.
Yeah.
Normally, I would bring up my own ADHD.
Yeah.
But with this new way of moving forward, of trying not to trauma bond, I guess, would I consciously not bring up the ADHD? Or would I look for something else to try and connect over? Like, how intentional do I have to change the dynamic of the conversation?
I think a really beneficial mantra for you in this would be, I am enough.
Yeah, true.
I, Haywood, am enough. I don't need to project my ADHD out there to create this connection. The connection will beautifully blossom as it needs to be.
Yeah.
I don't need to force this. What I bring to the table as just being me is more than enough.
Because I'm a bit torn, because I put so much value in the sharing of vulnerability.
Well, but this is the thing, right? So when you place such value on sharing vulnerability, you're negating the question, is there space for it to be received?
But I do it with the intention of helping those that need to share their vulnerability.
Well, of course, but like, it's...
Or of blocked that part of them.
Mm-hmm. But it's like I said about the when you invite the light in, right? And so if you've created a safe space, which you do, right? And you don't have to do all of these things to do so, the shadow naturally moves into the light. In other words, when you hold a safe enough space and when you are a good enough listener
Yeah.
vulnerability happens like a flower blossoming.
Yeah. I need to work on it. I love it.
I love it too.
I do. It's some fucking good stuff.
Mate, you know what? And I think you deserve some credit, because I've not met many people who are as self-aware and as willing to, work on themselves in their journey as you are.
Yeah. I
And
appreciate that.
to be this open here on this, media platform
Yeah.
is, I think, a necessary, needed thing, because I think, it's interesting. People are often really worried about being wrong.
Yeah.
Or really
right.
worried about, like, not completely succeeding at something. But how do you learn?
Right.
How do you redefine yourself? Change seldom occurs without a pause, right? So if you start viewing these moments as like a pause and a redirection, and have that reframe as opposed to I'm wrong and all the connotations that come with that, then it becomes a very empowering thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's all part of growth.
Yeah.
There's no growth if you don't allow yourself to acknowledge
Yeah.
what didn't serve you.
Because momentum's a cruel mistress, right? So momentum will move regardless of what's happening, right?
Yeah, right.
You have to be aware of the direction
Yeah.
of the movement.
Yeah.
And if it's going the wrong way, then you got to press the brakes, man.
Yeah, and that's a testament to so many things in life. Not just with the relationship with self, but relationship with...
With other people,
right.
with partners, with friendships, even as deep as family members, right?
Absolutely.
If it's not
Absolutely.
right, then it needs to be addressed, and it needs to have the space to be able to change.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important that people listen to themselves, because often they'll be, it might manifest in illness or depression or whatever, but it's always your body telling you like something's not right.
It's your body telling you to stop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's sad when it is a family member, because that's a hard attachment to let go of, but sometimes it's necessary, right?
Sometimes it is, and like even in my family, there are certain, aspects of the family that we've had to create distance from because of certain situations. And, that's, as you say, that has to come with a level of understanding.
Yeah.
And if you think about it like this, right? If you think about the currency of life as energy, right? Then when you are moving, or when situations are moving you at a speed greater than the energy available, you will run into obstacles.
Say that again?
So when the energy you have available, right, within you at any given moment, the maximum amount of energy you can hold, right, when the situation or the person demands you to move at a pace greater than the energy available, you will run into obstacles or you will stop.
Put it in an example.
Okay, so
within a relationship, for example, because I think that really resonates with a lot of people when it's a relationship that's not working.
Yeah, so say somebody is demanding all of your attention all of the time.
Yeah.
Right? And you have a certain amount of energy, and you're putting all of your energy into this pattern within the relationship. Either it will result in resentment and arguments, or or over a longer term termination of the relationship.
Or breakdown.
Exactly, or a nervous breakdown.
Yeah. Which is often the case, right?
Yeah, which is
or completely
far too common.
Yeah. Or completely losing yourself to the situation.
Exactly.
It's such a tragedy when you see these marriages that haven't been happy for decades.
Yeah.
And it's because there's ultimately a disconnect between the people, and they just haven't been able, one or both haven't been able to figure it out.
Well, this is it, man. And like a crack turns into a chasm when it's not given the attention it needs.
Yeah.
And that happens quicker than you think.
Yeah. There's a phrase like a relationship can either grow or dissolve.
Yeah.
But then some relationships completely dissolve and yet they stay together because it's safer, or it appears safer.
That trap.
Than leaving the relationship. Because especially if you haven't healed your wounds yet.
Yeah.
It can seem like a real threat to yourself to leave a relationship.
I think there's something to be said for, the difficulty of an experience does not necessarily determine its value.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh,
The tasty little soundbite for you there.
That's a great one. Okay, but open it up. Explain.
So I think sometimes when people have invested a lot of time, effort, and energy into something, even if it's not right, you know, it's very hard to break away from that because they're like, well, I've invested so much energy into this.
Yeah.
So there must be fruit to be born.
Yeah.
But if the soil is not going to help the things grow,
Right.
the things aren't going to grow. Right? You could work as hard as you want.
Do you think that makes it all the more difficult for certain people to break free from it because they've invested so much time
Absolutely.
for a fruitless garden?
Absolutely,
And they're like,
brother.
shit, I've got to walk away from this
Yeah.
fruitless garden.
Yeah.
I didn't even get a bloody pear out of it.
Or some people can't even see the fact that it's fruitless.
Yeah, right. Because
Denial-
they haven't tasted the sweet nectar for such a long time.
This is it, buddy. And, you know, then denial becomes a very real thing because it's a way of the brain protecting itself, right?
Yeah.
And protecting the choices that you've made. It's the ego, right? It's like to the point where it's gotten you so far and you're like, well, no, my life is good. And people get very defensive about that kind of thing.
And that can be coupled with your own self-worth can sometimes be suppressed, right?
I would say that's largely the case.
Yeah. And so then you don't even feel like you deserve the fruit,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah, no, it's a tricky one when it comes to relationships. Did we want to talk about something else?
Yeah, we were talking about, you know, the idea of, you know, the way you have cultivated relationships and connections in the past and how prevalent and present the trauma bonding aspect has been in those.
So I feel my old self I feel I have grown in the past 5 years, but I have brought some of my old patterns with me.
Yeah.
And so for the entirety of my life, a big aspect of how I feel I would connect with people would be talking about trauma-related things. So whether that's mental health or experiences that have happened to you, anything like that, I would gravitate towards.
Yeah.
Largely because I felt that I could connect with a person and there's lots of value in there.
Yeah.
For the two of us.
Yeah.
But now, that was at a point where I desperately needed the acknowledgement and validation from other people.
Yeah.
So I kind of used it as a tool for my own self-gain, I guess.
Yeah.
But now I feel my self-worth and my self-love, and I'm very content with how far I've come and where I'm at now.
Of course.
And so now my interactions with people, when I'm trying to connect with them, they're for different reasons than what they used to be. Before it was for validation, and now, like, if somebody doesn't like me, that's fucking cool. Like, thanks for being honest.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Merry Christmas. I'd rather that than, you know, find out years later that I didn't, you know, you weren't being your authentic self.
Yeah.
If an authentic person is telling me, like, they don't like me, I'm like, wicked. I can work with that.
Yeah.
And so my point is that I'm now perplexed as to why am I still so keen to talk about trauma and loss and difficult times with people and mental health and ADHD, like straight off the bat? Mm-hmm. Is that like an old pattern that's not serving me? Or have I changed the dynamic of why I'm doing it anyway?
Well, I'm going to ask you the first question, and that is, well, how does it feel?
Well, it doesn't feel wrong.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like I'm doing it with any malintent. It doesn't feel like I'm... Well, I guess that's where I have to look.
I don't think you were ever doing it with malintent.
No, I don't. I don't either.
But I think it was serving a purpose at the time.
Yeah.
And as you say, you know, that was validation.
Yeah.
But now it's changed. So I think what might be helpful here is like a little visualization, right? So if you began this point in the middle of a spiral, and then through experience you're moving out of that spiral, you will come across those things again, but you'll just be further away from them, right? In terms of how you see them, how you view them, so they won't be as present in your psyche as you know, or like different things will be present in your psyche.
Yeah.
So you're like literally moving out of the spiral until you're out of it, right? So it's not, and that shows your growth because you're moving along this line, right? And you're moving away from the thing that was bringing you pain.
I'm struggling with the notion of, do I need to stop trying to trauma bond with people for part of my growth? Is that part of my growth journey?
Well, Hayward, do you need to stop trauma bonding with people as a part of your growth journey?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
I don't know.
let's bring it in this way, right? So everything has a gift and a shadow, right? Everything has a siddhi and a shadow, right? So when you're moving in the siddhi of it, when you're moving in the gift of it, right? You're doing it from this place of you're trying to provide a platform and a safe space for people to be able to talk when they need to and do that when they need to, right? When you move into the shadow of it, you're doing that, albeit well-meaningly, from a place of serving a part of yourself that needs served.
Right.
Okay. And if you can develop a relationship within yourself where you can kind of self-identify and then also have like a sounding board of like trusted tribe to be able to, you know, just call you out if it's bullshit.
Yeah, to check in,
Yeah, then
because
that's really important.
Because it's complicated stuff, right?
Of course it is. It's not black and white.
Like even, you know, the term like self-aware, even within the realms of self-aware, some people are further on in their self-awareness.
Yeah.
Like I take my hat off to people that are continually self-aware at all times, because that takes practice, especially for people that have been through trauma.
Yeah.
Because the trauma just takes self-aware away almost.
Well, yes and no. So we have to be malleable, right? So even self-awareness can become dogmatic.
Right.
And I think when you're living in dogma and when you're like, you know, existing with the rules of dogma, you know, you're inevitably going to miss out on the holistic experience. It's okay to fuck up.
Yeah.
That's how we learn.
Yeah, no, to give yourself grace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I like talking about trauma.
Hey, listen, if in this part of your life, this is what opens those doors for you to be able to transmute those things and to help others transmute those things, and you're doing it from a place of genuine, like, you know, empathy and creating a space that is safe for everybody, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I feel like because of some of my experiences and because I've come to terms with so much of it, I'm now in a position where I can share them independent from how they used to make me feel. Yeah.
You can be objective about a situation as opposed to being like embodying it, you know, all the time.
Yeah, and I feel like that's it's an important place of service to other people that are lost, right?
Yeah.
And but I will keep checking in with myself, like, why are you doing it? Because I want to come from the right place. Because, you know, I've had a lot of toxic traits in the past and ego has been fucking prevalent.
Well, this is it. But, like, you know, when you achieve that state of guidance almost, right? That can be from teachers, that can be from self, that can be from, like, anything, you know. Then guidance and movement becomes movement and guidance.
What do you mean?
So you're moving in a way that is aligned, right?
Yeah.
So, and you can make it really simple and you can be like, okay, well, you know, what's the point of this? Like, why am I doing this? And you can be, okay, am I moving with integrity or not? And if you can answer that question honestly, it tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, right.
That's the first question you should always ask. Am I moving with integrity or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
That answers a lot, actually. Cool beans.
Yeah, baby.
What do you see yourself doing in 5 years? What do you feel like is your calling in this human experience?
Yeah, so a large part of it is being an earth keeper.
What does that mean for people that don't
know? A shaman.
Okay, what does that mean for people that don't know?
Somebody who's living a shamanic life, following a shamanic path, is working with others, is upholding the traditions and the ways of that lineage. It is encompassing all that it is, and is living an integral, honest life.
Does it necessarily mean that it's to be of service to others, or is that like a slight?
It's to be of service.
Okay.
The others part comes after.
Okay. And as part of that role, do you actively search that, or does it come to you?
No, you've got to let it come. Because
Right.
when you go out searching for it, you're going for the wrong reasons.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That makes so much sense to me, because we've spoken about this briefly, but I'd like to mention it on here, how, in the spiritual space, there's obviously, different people are having different experiences, and there's different types of people. But within the spiritual space, you've also got those that are authentic to themselves and to what all encompasses spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the inauthentic, or those that don't realize that they're being inauthentic.
Yeah, because that's a valid thing to mention, because it's not always out of a sense of people trying to dupe you, or people trying to be charlatans in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes people just don't realize that it's an effort to heal themselves, right? But that's not the same thing as because it's being presented as a different thing. So you will instinctively feel a disconnect.
Some would.
Some would, yeah. Some would not, because they're searching for if you're searching for something, then you'll most likely find it in most things. That's how the brain works. Right,
because there's, a lot of people will turn to spirituality and, higher consciousness because they're coming from, they're either at rock bottom or they're vulnerable and they're seeking guidance.
Yeah.
And those, by definition, those people are more vulnerable to being manipulated, taken advantage of. And so there's that's a very real thing in the spiritual space, that
absolutely
they're fucking I don't know, it's like in any industry that people take advantage.
Well, there've been many examples of this, in the yogic space, in the spiritual space, whatever. A very famous example is Bikram, right? Who was a complete charlatan, an abuser, and just a horrible human being, right? But he had these devoted followers, right? And I think if your driving force is to be a guru or to be somebody on a pedestal, you're in this for the goddamn wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Right? And you're in it, and you being in this is dangerous then. Whereas if you're on a journey and you're in a space of allowance, and if you're honest with your experience and you're living your experience with integrity, right? Then I think you're probably doing a good job.
At what point would you intervene if you saw one of these charlatans?
Yeah.
What would you do?
I would have to have great information about the situation. I would have to, because then, you have to see whose responsibility is it to do this? Because are you then robbing somebody of the experience that they need?
Right. Yeah, absolutely right.
Is it your place?
Yeah.
And is there space for it to be received also? Because sometimes what you can do is when you approach somebody in this space and you come across, albeit, well-meaning, it can be received in a very negative way, and it can actually create a great drift and difference between where people need to get to and where they end up.
Yeah, and it's a strong word, but robbing people of that experience, it kind of stunts their own growth.
Yeah.
You see it with if you've got a good friend and they're in a new relationship and you're like, oh, that's not a good person for you to be with.
No, exactly.
But then to tell them is counterproductive, right? Because they need to figure that out for themselves. And if anything, you push yourself away from them.
You could tell somebody exactly what they needed.
Yeah.
But if they haven't felt it, it can't get integrated.
Right.
And knowledge that has not been integrated is just words. When it is integrated, that's when it becomes wisdom.
Right. Yeah, right. And that's often through experience.
Exactly.
You need to experience it for yourself. Yeah. It is difficult though, isn't it? Because if you see something like that happening in front of you, there's that impulsion to help, I guess.
And then that's that warrior archetype stepping up again.
Absolutely.
And there are times when it serves.
Yeah, yeah.
There are times when it's right. Like, for example, if you're in a situation where you see somebody, you know, at risk of physical harm or something like that, you know, then, you know, you step in. Like,
Definitely.
your body will just step in.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, sometimes it's worth intervening.
Sometimes it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
You know, I've done that many times in the past.
Yeah, right.
Right? So bad for it sometimes, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But it's all part of a greater spectrum.
If there's somebody listening or watching who wants to feel more in touch with themselves, begin their self-growth journey, become more self-aware, or even just have like one practice that they can, one change that they can make today to help them move towards that, what would it be in your view? What's that like one starting point?
Take 5 minutes a day to listen. Right? And then when you get good at just listening, and I don't just mean listening with your ears, I mean like listening with all your senses, right? So taking in, you know, the movements around you, the many things, and approaching things with wonder, then you can deepen that, right? Then you can kind of swap the ratios of listening to speaking. Because I think that's something we've talked about before, where like I listen a lot.
I've noticed that with you. I mean, and in a beautiful way. I remember it was earlier on in the year and we met up and I had a lot to say. And I think for about an hour, you just gave space for me to unload. And you even, like, I remember apologizing a couple of times, which, well, because it was what it was. And you were like, no, I'm giving space. Like you allowed me, you gave me that permission almost.
Yeah.
It's like, no, but this is for you now.
Yeah.
And I remember walking away from that interaction going like, that's a really great way of doing it.
Yeah.
Like just holding a confident space for someone else to talk.
Yeah.
And you don't need to, it's funny because it's like on a subconscious level, you can feel that it's a safe space to talk, right? And it starts coming out. And since then, I try to practice that, especially with like the birth of this podcast.
Mate, I've noticed
it's
that
fucking
in you.
important.
I've really, really noticed that growth in you, and it's amazing.
Yes, and I thank you for it. And I have a lot of impulsive like interruptions because I'm so like, oh yeah, I've got something I could say about that.
Yeah.
But then when I've held back, it's allowed more to come from the conversation.
Yeah.
And I get to learn more, really, which is nice.
That's kind of the trick, brother.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the more you can learn, the better.
Yeah.
Learn it indefinitely. That's the other thing, you know. So, you know, spend time listening more and learn indefinitely.
Yeah. Yeah, and speak when it's needed.
Exactly. Because if you get, this is a really important point as well. If you can't embody the space of the student, you can't embody the space of the teacher.
Yeah, right.
So just, you know, listen. Let's learn together.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think we've covered all aspects today.
Beautiful.
I already know you'll be back on, but thank you, Afnan. I'm glad we did this.
Mate, I'm so glad. I'm always down for a convo with you.
Yes,
brother.
Cheers, dude.
Anytime, brother.
Yeah, real pressure in the media tonight.
Dude, we covered a lot.
Yeah, but the music got me feeling just fine. Yeah, I know we be quarantined tonight. Yeah, but the music got me feeling just fine. Yeah, real pressure in the media tonight. Yeah, but the music got me feeling just fine. Yeah, real pressure in the media tonight. Yeah, but the music got me